Margaret Hale had always believed that lies came in two kinds, the cruel ones sharp, selfish, and easy to spot, and the gentle ones whispered softly, meant to protect, meant to love. She never imagined the second kind could ruin a life. At 55, Margaret lived alone in a modest house on the edge of a quiet Ohio town, the kind of town where people waved even if they didn't know your name, and where secrets survived longer than winters. Every morning she brewed her tea the same way. Every evening she sat by the same window, watching the light fade across the street. And every night she remembered the lie. It had been 23 years ago, one sentence, one decision. One moment where fear disguised itself as kindness. Back then, Margaret was younger, softer, still believing that love could shield people from truth. Dear listeners, before we begin this story, I want to ask you a favor. If my story resonates with your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments which city or state you are listening from. It warms my spirit to know how far my voice travels. Happy listening. The memory always returned without warning. It was a rainy afternoon when the phone rang, the kind of rain that presses against windows like it wants to come inside. Margaret had been folding laundry when she heard her sister's voice on the other end, trembling, broken. "Something's happened," Claire whispered. "Please, you have to help me." Margaret didn't ask questions. She never did when it came to family. An hour later, she was sitting in a hospital hallway that smelled of disinfectant and fear. Claire sat beside her, hands shaking, mascara streaked like she'd been crying for days instead of minutes. "It was an accident," Claire said. "I swear it was." In the emergency room lay a young man, injured, unconscious, barely breathing. A pedestrian, a stranger, or so Margaret thought at first. Then she saw the wallet. The name inside it froze her blood. The boy wasn't a stranger at all. He was someone who trusted them. Someone whose life was about to fracture in ways none of them yet understood. And Claire, terrified, desperate Claire, leaned close and whispered the words that would change everything. "If they find out it was me, I'll lose everything." Margaret looked at her sister and saw not a criminal, not a liar, but a frightened woman standing at the edge of a cliff. The police arrived soon after. Questions were asked. And that was when Margaret lied. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hesitate long enough to be suspicious. She simply stepped forward and said, "I was driving." The room fell silent. Claire stared at her in disbelief. The officers nodded, pens moving. The lie settled into the world like it belonged there. In that moment, Margaret felt something close to relief. She told herself she was strong, that she was protecting family. That truth could wait. She didn't know she had just planted something that would grow quietly, painfully, for decades. That night, alone in her apartment, Margaret sat on the floor and pressed her palms against her eyes. She expected guilt to scream. Instead, it whispered, and whispers are easy to ignore at first. Margaret believed the lie would end there, but lies never stay where we leave them, they wait. The first lie is always the loudest. Margaret would later realize that everything after it happened quietly, almost politely, as if life itself didn't want to draw attention to what had been done. The police report was filed. The accident was labeled unfortunate. Margaret received consequences that were inconvenient but survivable. A fine, a temporary license suspension, mandatory counseling, nothing that looked from the outside like a ruined life. Claire cried and hugged her for weeks. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," she said again and again. Margaret smiled and told her that's what sisters do, and for a short while she believed it, but guilt doesn't arrive all at once. It slips in slowly like cold air through a crack you didn't know was there. At first, Margaret only felt it at night. In the silence, when there was nothing left to distract her, she would replay the hospital hallway, the wallet. The boy's face pale, still unaware. She told herself he recovered. She told herself the injury wasn't permanent. She told herself the lie had done no real harm, but she never checked because checking meant risking the truth. Years passed. Margaret moved to another town, a smaller one, quieter. She took a job at a local library, a place filled with other people's truths, carefully cataloged and shelved. She never married. Not because she didn't want love, but because love required honesty, and honesty felt dangerous now. Every time someone asked a harmless question, "Why don't you drive anymore? Why did you leave your old job?" Margaret felt her chest tight. The lie had roots now. Pulling at it would disturb everything, so she learned to live around it. Claire, meanwhile, flourished. She married, she had children. She spoke often about how family is everything. Every birthday card ended the same way. "I'll never forget what you did for me." Margaret read those words with a smile that never reached her eyes, because the truth was she had been forgetting, not the lie itself, but the person it affected most. One autumn afternoon, nearly 10 years after the accident, Margaret overheard a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Two patrons at the library spoke quietly near the history shelves. "Poor man," one said. "He's been struggling ever since the accident, can't keep steady work." The other nodded. "Yeah, happened years ago. Drunk driver hit him, they say." Margaret froze. Drunk driver. She felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She wanted to turn around, she wanted to leave, she wanted not to listen, but her body didn't move. Name's Daniel, the first voice continued. Used to be bright, studying engineering. After the injury, everything changed. Daniel. The name settled into her bones like lead. She didn't remember walking home that day, only sitting on her bed hours later, hands shaking, breath shallow. The lie had grown. It wasn't just protecting Claire anymore. It had rewritten a man's life. That night, Margaret stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. She studied her own face, the lines that hadn't been there before, the tiredness she could never explain. This was mercy, she whispered to herself, but the mirror offered no comfort, only a question she had avoided for years. Who was she protecting now? After that day, the guilt became louder. Every siren made her flinch. Every story of injustice felt personal. Every moral debate cut too close to the truth. She volunteered, donated, helped strangers whenever she could, as if kindness could balance a scale no one else could see. But nothing quieted the voice inside her that said, "You stole something that didn't belong to you." Then one winter morning, a letter arrived, no return address, just her name, written carefully, deliberately. Margaret stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sentence, "I think I know what really happened." Her hands went numb. The lie that had slept for decades had finally begun to wake up. Some truths don't knock. They wait until you're too tired to keep the door closed. Margaret didn't open the letter again. She didn't need to. The sentence burned in her mind, repeating itself with every breath she took. "I think I know what really happened." There was no threat, no accusation, just awareness. And awareness was far more dangerous. For days, she carried the letter folded in her coat pocket, as if it might dissolve if she left it behind. She checked her mailbox obsessively, jumped at unfamiliar footsteps, and studied every stranger's face a little too closely. Sleep became thin and restless. Her dreams changed. Instead of the hospital hallway, she now dreamed of doors she couldn't lock, doors she couldn't open, doors that creaked slowly as someone waited on the other side. The second letter arrived a week later. This one had a return address. Her hands trembled as she read it. "My name is Daniel. I don't know why it took me so long to write this. I've spent years trying to understand what happened to my life. I don't believe the story I was told." Margaret sat down hard on the kitchen chair. Daniel, the name she had tried not to remember, had found her anyway. The letter continued, calm, measured, almost gentle. He wrote about memory gaps, about inconsistencies, about how the accident had followed him like a shadow, how he had asked questions that never quite got answered. "You were kind to me once," he wrote. "You visited the hospital, you brought flowers. That kindness has stayed with me, and it's why I'm writing to you." Kindness, the word felt like a blade. Margaret didn't respond, not immediately. Instead, she did what she had done for years. She waited, hoping silence would solve what truth demanded courage to face. But waiting only made things worse. A third letter arrived, then a fourth. Daniel never accused her directly. That was the cruelest part. He asked questions, ethical questions, questions about responsibility, about truth, about how much one life was worth compared to another. And slowly, painfully, Margaret realized something that made her stomach twist. Daniel wasn't just searching for answers, he was searching for peace. One evening, Claire called. They spoke about nothing at first, weather, children, small complaints. Then Claire sighed and said, "Do you ever think about that day?" Margaret's throat closed. "Sometimes," she answered carefully. Claire's voice softened. "I don't think I could have survived without you. You saved me." Saved. Margaret looked around her quiet living room, the walls she had built to keep herself contained, the loneliness she had accepted as payment. Saved. That night she finally replied to Daniel. She wrote slowly, deliberately, "I remember the accident, I remember you, I'm sorry for the pain you've lived with." She stopped there, she couldn't cross the line yet. But even that partial truth felt like stepping onto unstable ground. Daniel's response came quickly. He asked to meet, just to talk, he said. No lawyers, no police, no anger. Margaret stared at the screen until the words blurred. Meeting him would mean looking directly at the life her lie had shaped. Not meeting him would mean choosing herself again. That was the ethical line she could no longer avoid. They met at a small cafe halfway between their towns. Daniel arrived first. He stood when he saw her, a courtesy that carried more weight than he knew. He looked ordinary, not broken, not bitter, just tired. They spoke about the weather, the coffee, the years that had passed. Then Daniel leaned forward and said quietly, "I don't want revenge." Margaret's breath caught. "I just want the truth," he continued, "because without it I don't know who I am anymore." There it was. The cost of her lie finally spoken aloud. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. The moment stretched. She could still protect Claire, she could still protect herself, or she could finally protect the truth. And in that silence, Margaret understood something that changed everything. Her lie hadn't only harmed Daniel, it had slowly erased her. Some lies survive because they are shared, but some truths demand to be carried alone, no matter the cost. Margaret didn't answer Daniel right away. She sat there, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't tasted, listening to the quiet hum of the cafe, plates clinked, a door opened, someone laughed softly in the corner. Life was going on, unaware that hers was standing at a breaking point. "I need time," she finally said. Daniel nodded as if he had expected nothing else. "I've been waiting years," he replied gently. "I can wait a little longer." That kindness, undeserved, patient, hurt more than anger ever could. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every mile pressed the question deeper into her chest. How much damage does one truth do, and how much does silence continue to do every day? That night Margaret didn't sleep. She walked through her house, touching familiar objects as if seeing them for the last time. The bookshelf. The old photographs, the window where she watched the evening light fade. This life, quiet, controlled, lonely, was the life the lie had built, and it was about to collapse. The next morning, she called Claire. "I need to talk to you," Margaret said. Something in her tone must have given her away because Claire didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Come over." Claire's home was warm, full of noise and life, children's drawings on the fridge, the smell of coffee, the sound of footsteps upstairs. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, hands folded tightly. "They've been asking questions," she began. Claire stiffened. "Who?" "The man, Daniel." Claire's face drained of color. "He contacted me," Margaret continued. "He wants the truth." Silence fell like a weight between them. "No," Claire whispered. "No, no, no, you can't tell him, you promised." Margaret closed her eyes. "I never promised forever." Claire's voice rose, sharp with fear. "You don't understand what will happen. I'll lose everything, my family, my job, my life." Margaret looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw the same fear from years ago, unchanged. "And what about his life?" Margaret asked quietly. "What about the years he lost?" Claire stood abruptly. "You made a choice," she said. "You don't get to undo it now." The words struck harder than any accusation. Margaret realized then that the lie had not just protected Claire, it had trapped her. For days, Margaret lived in limbo. Daniel sent one final message: "If you choose silence, I'll understand. But please know I can't heal without the truth." That was it. No pressure, no threats, just honesty. And suddenly Margaret saw the ethical line clearly. This wasn't about punishment anymore, it was about dignity. She went to the police station alone. The building looked smaller than she remembered, less frightening somehow. She asked to speak to an officer. Her voice didn't shake as much as she expected when she said, "I need to correct a statement I made years ago." The truth came out slowly. Not dramatically, not heroically, just fact by fact: the accident, the lie, the years of silence. When she finished, the officer sat quietly for a moment. "Why now?" he asked. Margaret swallowed. "Because the lie didn't end that day. It's been happening every day since." The consequences followed: legal reviews, difficult conversations, newspaper whispers in a small town where everyone knew her name. Claire didn't call. When they finally spoke, the conversation was brief and broken. "I hope it was worth it," Claire said. Margaret didn't answer because she didn't know yet. Daniel visited her once after the truth came out. They sat on a park bench watching leaves fall. "I don't feel better," he admitted, "but I feel real." Margaret nodded. "I don't feel forgiven." "That's not my job," he said gently. Those words stayed with her. Truth didn't bring relief, it brought loss. But somewhere beneath the wreckage, something fragile had begun to return. Life did not reward Margaret for telling the truth, it simply continued, stripped of illusion, quieter than before. The legal matters settled slowly. Some consequences were softened by time, others were not. Margaret lost acquaintances who had once smiled easily at her. She lost the comfort of being misunderstood rather than known, and she lost her sister. Claire never said goodbye properly. Their last exchange lingered unfinished, a door left half open, half shut. Margaret learned that some relationships do not survive truth, even when truth is necessary. That was the price. Margaret moved again, this time not to escape but to begin without hiding. A small town, a modest apartment, fewer possessions, less weight. She found work at a community center, teaching adults how to read, men and women who carried their own quiet shames, their own unspoken histories. She never told them her story, but she recognized the look in their eyes, the look of people trying to rebuild themselves honestly. Daniel wrote once more, not often, not frequently, just enough. They didn't become friends. They didn't become strangers either, they became witnesses to each other's survival. In one letter, he wrote, "I still have days where I wonder who I might have been, but I don't wonder anymore why my life changed." That matters more than I expected. Margaret read that line many times. Truth hadn't healed him, but it had given him ground to stand on. Years later, Margaret sat by her familiar window again, older now, hair touched with silver, hands steady in a way they had never been before. She thought about the lie, not with panic, not with shame, but with clarity. She understood now what she hadn't then: lies told out of love are still lies, and lies don't disappear, they relocate. They move from the moment into the years. From the mouth into the soul. One afternoon, a young woman at the community center asked her, "Do you think people can be forgiven for doing the wrong thing for the right reason?" Margaret paused. Then she answered carefully. "I think forgiveness isn't always the point," she said. Sometimes, truth is about giving others their dignity back even when it costs you. The woman nodded, thoughtful. Margaret watched her walk away, feeling something settle inside her at last. Not peace, but alignment. In her final reflection, Margaret accepted what could not be undone. The years were gone, the damage was real, the scar remained, but scars, she had learned, are proof of survival, not of failure. She had lied once to protect someone, and she had spent years paying the price. But in the end, she chose truth. And that choice, imperfect and painful as it was, allowed her to finally live without hiding. Even kind lies leave scars. But truth, though costly, returns dignity to both the wounded and the one who wounded them.